you, Rose.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to the Rosemary McGee Creativity Conversation. I'm Pella McDaniels, your curator of African American collections here at Emory. We are honored to have Spelman's president, Mary Schmidt Campbell, and WABE's Rose Scott at Emory in conversation with our own Kimberly Wallace-Sanders. Before I introduce the panel, let me say a few words about the Framing Shadows exhibit, which will be up through December of this year. And I hope all of you had an opportunity to both wander through it, but also engage with the images that are affixed to the wall. Those of you who have been able to see the Framing Shadows know that the images are from the Robert Langmuir collection of African American photography. He was going to be with us this evening, but he's unfortunately not here. It would have been great for him to participate in this wonderful program. Now, this collection is absolutely phenomenal. With more than 10,000 images ranging from early daguerreotypes and tintypes to cabinet cards and large format prints, it is not only a treasure, it is one of the single collections or regular signature collections in the Stuart A. Rose Manuscript Archives and Rare Book Library. It is one of more than 200 collections acquired by Dr. Randall Burkett, our founding curator of African American collections here at Emory. For more than 2 decades, and with the support of the university's leadership, Dr. Burkett's passion for collecting unique and rare items from books and periodicals to photographs and ephemera has allowed Emory to develop one of the top, I say, 4 comprehensive collections of African American related materials in the nation. I'll let you guess who the other 3 are. In case you missed it, we do have an exhibit at in the Shatton Gallery titled Building Emory's African American Collections, Highlights from the Curatorial Career of Randall K. Burkett. This will be up through July. So if you didn't have a chance to wander through and peruse those materials, I recommend you come back as soon as possible and take a half a day or take a tour with Dr. Burkett. So let's get on with the show. This evening's program features 3 brilliant, insightful, and influential thinkers. Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell is the 10th president of Spelman College and began her tenure on August 1st, 2015. Prior to arriving in Atlanta, Dr. Campbell was a major force in the cultural life of New York City and included roles at the Studio Museum of Harlem and New York's Department of Cultural Affairs. She later served as Dean of New York University's Tisch School of the Arts for more than 2 decades. In September of 2009, former President Barack Obama appointed Dr. Campbell as the Vice Chair of the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. Dr. Campbell is a contributor to numerous publications, including one of my favorite that I shared with her earlier, Tradition and Conflict, Images of a Turbulent Decade, 1963 to 1973, and most recently, An American Odyssey, The Life and Work of Romare Bearden. Dr. Campbell, thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, if you listen to NPR's station WABE here in Atlanta, you will hear Rose Scott regularly as the host of the midday news program, Closer Look. In her role as co-host and now host, Scott has interviewed foreign heads of state, cabinet members, U.S. ambassadors, and many civic and cultural leaders. Scott has been honored with several awards, including a Southeast Regional Emmy Award. Rose Scott, we are fortunate and very, very grateful that you are with us tonight as well.
Thank you.
Now, Dr. Kimberly Wallace-Sanders is one of our own. She is an associate professor of American and African American Studies in the Department of African American Studies here at Emory University. Prior to that, of course, she was an assistant professor in the now defunct ILA. And we lament over that because she was my professor in the ILA. And a number of you are also ILA grads, so. A little levity. Her research and teaching specialties are 19th century American and African American women's literature, ethnic stereotypes in visual and material culture, and African American photography and portraiture, among other things. Dr. Wallace-Sanders is curator of the Woodruff Library exhibit, which again I hope you all had a chance to view before this program, Framing Shadows, Portraits of African American Nannies from the Robert Langmuir African American Photograph Collection. She is also completing a new volume titled Nannies, Mammies, and Love Slaves, Portraits of Black Women with White Children. Ranging from 1850 to 1950, it will be the largest collection of portrait photographs of its kind. As a natural sequence to her book, Mammy, A Century of Race, Gender, and Southern Memory, this new book project represents a shift in her scholarly interests from the cultural representations of the Mammy as a character to the African American woman and often young girls whose daily lives were focused on caring for white children. Dr. Wallace-Sanders worked at Spelman from 1994 to 1999. And I finally want to say again, it's been a pleasure working with Dr. Wallace-Sanders, both as one of her advisees and mentees to now colleague and co-conspirator in terms of the projects we will plan to produce out of these archives in the near future. So with that being said, I will now turn this over to Rose Scott to begin the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, and can y'all hear me out there? Well, good evening, and on behalf of Public Broadcasting Atlanta, let me just say thank you, because this is going to be a really awesome conversation. It's a conversation because even as a journalist, often we just need to listen as opposed to asking questions, and it's a great space. It's a great dialogue. We have two outstanding experts here, and when we talk about an exhibit like this, and the one that you experienced tonight, these photographs tell a story. These portraits tell a story. And I'm just honored to be a part of this conversation. But before we get started, just if you had a chance to see the exhibit, how moving was it? I mean, it was just incredible. I had the chance to come over Monday, and I was a professor, and I got a little choked up because, as I said to you, I see my mom, I see my Nana, I see my aunts, we call them aunties. I see my aunties, So just by show of hands, did you feel like it was personal for some of you? Did you feel it was personal? Did you think about the folks who were in these photographs? Did you ask yourself, I wonder what happened to them? Did you even ask yourself, why were these even taken to begin with? And those are the kind of questions that we will have a conversation about tonight. So thank you all. And I want to begin with that, which is reflection. I think that's a good place to start. And President Campbell, I'll start with you, because can you even sum up the emotions around seeing this collection, from a personal viewpoint for you? You've been in this space for such a long time, and I imagine that whether it's sculpture or a painting or whatever, these tell a story. What's your reflection?
They do tell a story, Rose. And you asked the question, why were they even taken in the first place? And so you look at the image and you say, well, we know that it wasn't the woman, the black woman in the photograph who commissioned this photograph. So it had to be taken by the people for whom she worked. Why would they take this? Is it a representation of status? Is it a way of honoring the person in the photo? Whatever it is an opportunity for the person in that photo to assert identity within the frame that's been given to her. And so once I began to look at them that way, then it became very interesting about how each woman found a way to bring her identity, her personality forward, whether it was a little piece of jewelry or something in her hair or the way she tied her hair or her dress or the trim around her dress or even her posture or her posture in relationship to the child even. There was sometimes even a tad of defiance almost in that relationship. And then it becomes an incredible tapestry. But I have to say, at the end of the day, after I look at those photos, I have to contrast them to the photos that Black people began to take of themselves after emancipation. Right. And they're so completely different. They're bold, they're confident, they're assertive, and the conversation between those two perspectives, I think, is what really intrigues me.
Wow, and we're going to dig deep into that in just a moment. Professor, you told me on Monday, even though you've seen these photos so many times over and over again, looking at them, it still stirs something inside of you.
You know, I tried to remember, you asked me about the first time I saw them. And I will say that the first photograph I saw of an African-American woman holding a white child was actually at Spelman College. It was at the Women's Research and Resource Center when it was in Giles Hall, because Beverly Guy Sheftall was working on Sage magazine, Sage Journal, and they put together an issue on Black women's labor, Black women in work. And those photographs were from the Georgia archives. And so she doesn't know that I looked at all those photographs, I looked them up, I went to the Georgia archives, and I was astonished at how many there were. So at first there's a shock at how many there are. And then I looked at these photographs and I thought, they looked familiar to me. They look like women I've seen. They look like women I know. They look like women I want to be. Right? There's something about them that is so precious in its familiarity that the white children that they're holding really recede completely in the background. For whatever reason in this time period, they kept putting those children in white, right? So you have a photograph and they just blend right out. The lighting on the Black women's faces just blew me away. And when I tell you I stared at those faces over and over again, and I'm looking at them saying, I know you have a story. I know you're in there, and I'm going to tell this story. I'm going to make sure that you are not lost in history. I'm going to make sure that you're not invisible. I'm going to make sure that people look at your face and see you as a real person and not as human furniture, right? Not as a prop. But that's very, very important. So, I know.
Don't make me cry here.
I want to say that, you know, there's a kind of a sophisticated term, visual dissonance, right? So cognitive dissonance is when something happens that's unexpected. The visual dissonance is when you see something that you didn't expect. So if you're expecting to see the stereotypical mammies, there's a visual dissonance that's not what you see at all, that you see real Black women with real lives who left their children, who left their families behind to take care of somebody else's children all day long. And that's what gets me every single time.
Let me ask you this, is there beauty in that?
You know, there's a beauty in the resilience that I can see in their faces. There's a beauty in the way that they are holding themselves upright. There is a beauty in, I think, the way President Campbell said, that their insistence that you will see me. I know I'm not supposed to be the main subject of this photograph, but I'm here. I have on some nice clothes. I'm going to sit up. And one of the things that I think that's surprising to people is the way the women are holding the children. A very casual way. They're holding themselves, but the children really just seem to be there in lots of ways.
President Campbell, I want to direct that question to you too, because the reason I asked that was I was interviewing a rapper, T.I., and as we were walking around his neighborhood, and I asked him about his struggle, and he said, you know, there's beauty in that struggle. And there's beauty in the fact that everything that we as Black people went through, there's beauty in that. And I had a listener email me and said, I don't understand, how is there beauty in the struggle? And that's why I asked that question about, is there beauty in those photographs? So your take?
There's obviously great beauty in those photographs. And I think what's very interesting is that the collector himself felt compelled not only to have one or two of those photographs, but a whole collection of them, that he began to compile that as if he were trying to assemble for us a whole tableau of that beauty. You can see that whoever has put this collection together really loves the idea of those women looking back out at him. And that's why I thought was so interesting, that this all came from one person who really clearly began to see where that beauty resided.
Professor, I want to also let the audience in on that because I asked you Monday, how did all this come about?
Right.
It was a box.
It was box. So we'll go to this slide. So this is Mrs. Spelman McDaniels, who was the caretaker for Robert Lanier. So she was his family's domestic. And he said that she inspired him to put this collection together. And when the collection came to Emory, it came with a catalog that was dedicated to her. Right? So she inspired him to collect all of these photographs. And that's astonishing to me. Right?
What do we know about their relationship?
You know, not very much, except that she and her husband worked for his family for years, and that he was close to one of her children. That's all that I know. If he were here, I would ask some more questions, but that's all that I know about it. But the fact that her lived experience inspired him enough to put this collection together, I think is really extraordinary.
These photos, and we're going to go through some of them, and one thing that I know that you're going to do, and I hope the audience really pays attention to, is something that Dr. Campbell talked about in terms of the details of the clothing, the position of the child, even some of the narrative that's written. So I want you all to pay, it's like class, I want you all to really pay attention.
Right.
If you got to go to the bathroom, hold it.
Right.
But, and Professor, I'll let you take it from here.
So, you know, I talked with a lot of people about what key image we would use for this exhibit, and we picked this one really because of the light on her face. And there was something about her. There's something about her. When I look at these portraits, I am really looking very deeply at these women. And I stare at them. I'm really looking at the eyes. I'm looking at their skin. I'm looking at her hair. I'm looking at that ribbon. I'm looking at the trim on the dress. The fact that the baby is leaning against her. But look at where her hands are. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So for me, one of the things that a portrait like this does is to present a really important counter-narrative to the overriding story that this relationship, when it's represented by white authors in particular, is one of loyalty, of benevolence, of affection, of undying and unconditional love. And then I look at this and I think,
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a
visual
real,
dissonance.
Right.
I'm not saying unconditional love here.
right. No, what comes across is her self-consciousness about how she wants to look
That's right.
for the camera.
That's right.
Her understanding that this is going to live after her.
Right.
And she's more concerned about that than, it seems, caressing the child.
Right.
She's certainly not caressing the child. She's simply sort of bracing it.
Right.
And Professor, before we get to the next photo, something that was very interesting you told me on Monday was about the lighting.
Yes, yes. So this is one of the things I had to do with moving from history and literature to visual culture, was really learn a lot about photography. I know more about the history of photography than I ever thought I would want to know. But the lighting was set up with the adults first, so that the children would be brought in last, so that the children were not wiggling, because that would make the photograph blurry. So the lighting is set for the African American women, largely, in the portrait, and that's what makes their faces stand out so much. That's the thing that got me, is that the more photographs I looked at, their faces were really standing out because the lighting is set for her. The baby would be brought in at the very end so that the baby wouldn't wiggle. So when you think of the technology involved in early American photography, the fact that the lighting, this is the way to think about it, the lighting is set for her skin tone specifically. Right? And that's what shows up in the photographs over and over again, is the way their faces come out.
Let's go to the next one.
Okay. So this was one of the most extraordinary portraits I've ever seen, and I have been all over the country looking for these portraits. I have been all over the country. I think I told you, I went to St. Louis to look for 4. I went to Virginia to look for 3. And then when this collection came in, that there were over 20 in a box called Nannies, Randall Burkett was there. I was very excited. Right, so I'd never seen anything like this in all of the portraits that I've seen. The fact that someone labeled this 2 black hands and put a date on it, that they're dating this from 1865. And the idea that I believe this would be a black woman has been cropped out completely, you know, that she's so unnecessary as what I would call a human prop, right? That it just, all you have is 2 black hands. So in terms of disturbing photographs, this is one of the most disturbing ones I've ever seen. I've never seen anything like this. And it's one of the things that makes this collection unusual, is this portrait.
And the date, because for people to understand, these are not slaves.
Right.
You know, this is post-emancipation.
Right,
This is
exactly.
1865, probably one of the oldest.
And this is the earliest one.
This is the earliest one,
one.
right.
Exactly, they're all after this point. That's exactly right. So I've talked about this one a lot because the hem of that dress is extraordinary to me. I have seen a lot of clothes from this time period. When you don't have a date on a photograph, you have to really study fashion so that you can tell that this is probably a dress that was worn about 1890, maybe 1900. But it's so unusual, and there's so much detail that it really made me think that she made this dress herself. It is pulling at the chest area, and it's been mended. Right? So I don't know if someone insisted that she wear that dress or if she really wanted to wear that dress herself because it reflected something. It was her chance to express something herself. I point out the fact that she's wearing a little hairpiece all the way at the top. That's a different texture from her hair. So for me, that's very important because it means that she knew her portrait was being made. She probably was not going to get a copy or get this photograph at all. But to capture this moment in time that she wanted to look a particular kind of way and express her creativity and her personhood, like herself, to come through this. This is why I spend hours looking at the women. And somebody mentioned something about the child, and I thought, oh, yes, that's right, there's a child in that photo.
So the interesting thing, you can talk about her dress, and the details are extraordinary. The hem, but there's also at the cuff.
At the cuff,
that
that's
is
exactly
turned
right.
over.
Yes.
The buttons are covered.
Right.
The almost doily collar and the little scarf around her neck. The piece of jewelry that appears
That's
to be
right.
on her wrist. There is so much
detail.
rich detail in that she took time to sort of get herself almost in costume for this photograph. And to your point about the lighting previously, this is certainly an example in which the privilege lighting is for the woman as opposed to the child.
That's exactly right.
Let me ask you all this before we talk about this one. Are these photos, do they also at that time represent status
Absolutely.
of the family?
That's the reason to take
true.
them, right?
Yeah.
So you could show
Yeah.
people that you could afford
There's a wonderful
domestic help.
There's a wonderful painting that Titus Caffer, the artist, has in his YouTube, his TED Talk video. And one of the things he points out in this 18th century painting is the attention to small details, like a lace collar or covered buttons or, in this case, an embroidered jacket. Those are all ways of things to put into a visual image in order to convey status.
Right. Exactly.
When we talked about this photo, and I hope you all had a chance, and if you go back to look at it again, what I was fixated on was the hands. The hands that were, the texture, it was almost as you could tell this person had worked, maybe had a hard life. You look at the hands, and I hope you all get to go back and see, did you all see that? It
Yes.
just
Her hands look much older than her face.
much older than her face. Tell us about this one.
And so one of the things I point out in this portrait is the juxtaposition between this incredibly elaborate jacket with what's called leg of mutton sleeves and the apron, which marks her as a servant. Right? So even if she wanted to express some creativity, I'm going to wear this fabulous jacket, she is still wearing an apron, right? To make that clear, right? So that's one of the things I notice about this.
Can we talk about expression for a moment? Because
Sure.
I think Dr. Campbell touched on it for a moment. The expressions, you said folks, they don't even look happy taking a photo,
That's
but the
exactly
expressions tell a story.
The expressions do tell a story. I think that's probably the most common remark that I get is that the women don't look happy. And to be clear, people were not smiling for photographs at this stage. It's not something that people did. But you can look at the faces and see the women look tired. The women sometimes look defiant. The women look like they can't wait for this to be over. Right? Or they look like this is, okay, let's do this. Let's do this. But in every single portrait, there's something different.
Right. So another striking thing, because this is my first time seeing these portraits when I saw them in the exhibit upstairs. But one of the things that's very striking here is that the backgrounds are very tight. There's rarely an expansive view. So very often when you see photographs that have been self-authored, the idea is to give you a sense of where they live, what the living room looks like, what the library might look like. This is the very tight on the body of the woman. And the focus is very definitely not even on the child in most cases, but on the woman. And I find that absolutely fascinating. Why was that? And that's a question
That's a good question.
really fascinates me.
So this woman has fallen asleep, and they put the baby on
Baby's
her
home.
lap.
Wow.
Now,
Poor baby.
I don't know why you wouldn't wake her up for this portrait, but this is, again, when I look at this, I think this is the portrait that reflects how exhausting it is to be a domestic, right? To take care of children, to be the person who's doing the cooking and the cleaning all day long, and that having a moment to sit down that she actually fell asleep. That's an entire narrative about her that we don't get anyplace else. So for me, this was a photograph that spoke about the fact that child care is labor. That's work, right? That's a great deal of work. And everything about this photograph, the contrast that you see light and dark alternating, right? So the white around her neck and then dark and then white again, right? So that's what I would look at that particular kind of pattern. Right. And I also think her skin looks unbelievable. Oh.
This is different because this is a child taking care of a child.
So most people have not seen these portraits of young black girls taking care of white children. And I call these companion nannies. And I call them that because in what I began to read about this particular relationship is that white families felt that their children were traumatized when the black women who took care of them died. And so if you got younger women and younger girls to take care of your children, then you wouldn't have to worry about your child being upset when this woman died. So they're companion, right? Almost as if they're like a hired playmate, right? And there are more of them than people think. The idea that these are young girls in particular who really from the age of maybe she's 7 or 8 years old is charged with the duty of taking care of children and would be the playmate, would be in charge of all kinds of things. And I look at a portrait like this and I think, what kind of life is she having? What kind of childhood is she going to be able to have?
And that's my next question. Have you been able to track down any of the individuals or their...
Not at all, I can tell you that. We call these orphan photographs because there's almost no information that goes with them. Really nothing. On the back, very little information. And I've been collecting these for years. When you get any information, I track it down. But we don't have a name here, nothing here.
So what's fascinating to me when I went through the show for the first time this evening is I immediately thought of W.B. Du Bois. In 1900, he was invited to be part of the Negro Pavilion at the Paris World's Fair. And he took over, he's a sociologist, historian, so he takes over lots of charts about how much progress African Americans have made since emancipation. But he also takes over 368 photographs, All of them are taken by African American photographers of African Americans in business, at what were then called the Negro schools, they're now called historically black colleges and universities, playing music inside their homes, at their churches, that all aspects, this expansive universe, this world that is, in order to, in a way, it is a counter-narrative to the narrative that's here in these photographs. And you begin to see the quarrel that emerges in the late 19th, early 20th, and continues between how we are seen and represented by those who are not us, and the way in which we choose to represent ourselves.
Right.
And that was the thing that's really striking.
More of a
to me.
conversation.
Yes.
So I
And
think
it's still going on today.
Still going on today,
Is it
absolutely.
Timothy Askew, the Atlanta photographer.
Yes,
Yes,
that's right.
Timothy
Yes.
Askew, who's an African-American photographer from Atlanta who took those portraits. And they're very different. I mean, if you want to go to probably the Library of Congress,
Right.
where you can look at the Dubois
Right.
photographs, though they're completely different. There's warmth, there's
Yes.
affection. You're absolutely right. There's a creative expression. There's a
Right.
sense of personhood that you're not going to see here.
And I think this is a good time to take a pause, and I want to talk about the Mammy School.
Oh.
And do you all know
I'm
about
sorry,
that?
the which
The
school?
Mammy
Georgia's
School.
history?
Mammy School.
Oh, the Mammy School.
Take it away.
Okay, so in 1911, a group of white Southerners, mostly men, got together and decided that the generation of Mammy was dying out, and they wanted to make sure that the qualities of the Mammy would be replicated in the next generation. So you needed to have a training school. So they drew up plans and had a subscription. You could donate money for this. It was going to be built in Athens, Georgia. And the intention was to train black women largely, if black men wanted to come, certainly, to cook, to clean, to do sewing, and to learn how to take care of children so that they would be able to, the next generation, every generation would be able to have that same relationship. And you could donate money and have a room named after your Mammy. So you could have a room for Mammy Charlotte and Mammy, or Auntie, I don't know, Auntie Jane, right? You could have a room in their honor. Right? And so it never came to fruition. But that was one of the extraordinary things about this collection also, is that we actually have the drawing of those plans. And that booklet is astonishing, the way people talk about how important these women are, and to make sure that we, the next generation, you know.
Well, you know, the origins of Spelman College are, again, another counter-narrative to that. And that, you know, 10 women and 1 girl who showed up in 1881 were probably domestic workers or laundresses, but they probably came
were doing
from
this work.
like that.
Right.
And in fact, by 1911, the school would have grown to several hundred, and it would have posed, you know, a real threat.
A real threat to,
right?
to schools.
To that workforce.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Next photo.
Okay. So this one is interesting because the color really pops out, right? So this is color that's added later. You know, it's hard to know what to say. The jacket and the bottom don't really seem to go together. There is color added to the little girl's face and also to the black woman's face. Can you see some shading in her face? So they put a little pink in her lips, but they've also made her face a little bit darker. Right. Okay. So this is on the back. It says, Catherine, this woman is pregnant. That's what I put on the labels. I wanted people to be sure that they saw that, because people see this, her smile first. It's very interesting. People say, oh, she's smiling. Oh, finally, there's one who's smiling. And then when I point out, well, she's pregnant also. And so the question is, who is going to take care of her baby while she's taking care of this baby? This uniform is brand new. The uniform, you can see the creases in the uniform are new. The apron, all of that looks very new. Now, I've looked at this very closely. She's wearing a wig. You can tell by the way the hair is sort of sitting on her head and the cap is sitting on that. So again, the attention to the way that she looked and how she wanted to represent herself is really important to me. And there's only one name on the back of the photograph, and it's probably not hers, even though there are 2 people in the photograph, right? I don't know what to say about this one. Yes, this particular pose where they're turned toward the child was very, very common, right? This is for Aunt Sal. The baby's information is there. Again, you know, the babies are all in white, so they really begin to blur after a while. Okay. This one is really important because this woman, as a lighter-skinned African-American, it seems to me that the employers wanted to make sure that no one mistook that for her baby, so they made sure that she has on her servant's uniform, so that you know that's not her child. Okay. And I think, oh, this is from the photography studio from Wheeling, West Virginia. And I'll say that the majority of the photographs where we know something about the studio, none of them are Southern. That's the best way to put it. They're not Southern.
Really?
It's West Virginia, it's Baltimore, it's Brooklyn, New York, it's Pennsylvania, but they're not Southern studios. Right? Again, another companion nanny, very young girl. She is so young that her apron doesn't even fit her, right? She's a pillow under her feet, right? She is really young. And if you look all the way in the corner, do you see there's an arm holding up the baby? That's probably the mother's arm. So all of these photographs for me, they raise more questions than give you answers. Why isn't she in the photograph? Why is she holding up the child? Why would you let somebody so young hold this little baby? Right? What is the point here, right? To show the status? To have a young black girl holding your child, right? I really, I always want to know more about the intention here. What was someone's intention in making this particular photograph? But the photographs of young children break my heart every time I see them, because I think, you know, of what your day is like revolving around somebody else's children, right? That nobody's really noticing that you are a child yourself and what your needs might be. Right? Again, it's sort of propping, he's just holding.
And this is
toddler
a
up.
young boy.
This is a young boy. This is a young boy. It's very unusual. This is a young boy who's, right, just there.
Right.
holding her up.
It's also unusual in that it's an exterior shot,
Yes,
and
on
he
the
almost
outside.
looks like he could have just, you know, been wandering by, as opposed to have been
Right,
in
come
a
sit
book
here,
or something.
right,
you
come
know,
sit here,
you know.
right.
It's-
Right.
Wow.
It has much less formality.
Yes, that's exactly like that. He was wandering by, come over here and have your picture taken. So this is a woman also with 3 children, being sort of really surrounded by. And I really wanted people to pay attention to the age range, that from young girls to older women, that the lifespan for black women taking care of white children, to think about what that is like. Yes. Oh, this one's also outside. Very unusual because the baby is happy.
What do you think is the age of this woman?
You know, that's very hard to tell. Right. What do you think? What do you think? It's hard to tell.
It's
isn't
hard
it?
to tell.
It's very hard to tell. It's very, in most of them, it's very hard
Yeah.
to tell. Yeah. So this one, this was written on the back. Elizabeth sees Mammy. So you really see that she's called a Mammy here, not a nanny. They're very specific about that. Elizabeth sees Mammy holding a friend of Liz. Holding a friend. Liz didn't like this. Now, Elizabeth has been mentioned twice. Elizabeth isn't even in the photograph. Right? But the black woman is only Elizabeth sees Mammy. Right? The posture here is really interesting, that the child is looking at the photographer and she is looking in the opposite direction. That's also fairly unusual. Right? So written on the back here, it's hard to read, but this is all about this little boy who is as spoiled as the only son can be. He gives his age and says, you know, we're coming for Christmas. This is a very unusual belt or strap. It's very hard to say who dressed these children, I always wonder. But again, she's in the photograph, but there's no mention of her. That's I think the other thing, the anonymity and the invisibility of these women, that they're invisible, no voice, that's the thing that drives me. I'm really driven to make sure that we know something about them. So here's Miss Payne, ready to go for a ride with her nurse, Mary Lizzie. This is Washington, D.C., 1909.
Wow.
Right? So Miss Payne looks like she's, what, a month old? But her nurse, Mary Lizzie, right, gets her first name. Okay. Very unusual to have an African-American man holding a baby. That's very unusual. So I don't know what his role was, but it seems like he was asked to hold the child for this photograph. He's very dressed up, very well dressed. And I think, is this one that's Brooklyn? This is a Brooklyn, New York.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is unusual because she's not holding a white child, but she's been marked. Harriet Kittle, let me tell you, to get a first and a last name,
Right.
you talk about a needle in the haystack. That was
gold, yeah.
extraordinary. I did all kinds of searches and will continue to search to try to find more information about Harriet Kittle. But our colored nurse, right, this sense of possession. Okay.
So, you know, earlier today at my desk, and I was trying to think of, you know, as journalists sometimes we try to sound smarter than we actually are. And it's a little trick we do. But I was sitting there, I was thinking, you know, this is really like a four-way intersection. You know, it's art, it's history, it's commentary, it's reflection. For me.
It's also business.
Yeah.
And I, you know, that last image made me think about that because there was the card, the business card, that was at the H. Bishop.
Right.
And in fact, photography was a new technology in those days, very popular. Americans in general like to take photographs, and particularly of members of their family. What's really important to keep in mind is photography became one of the thriving businesses for African Americans. Mm-hmm. So you had somebody like James Vanderzee, who was, you know, 10 years after this, 10, 20 years, who had a thriving business on 135th Street and Lenox. You had photographers like Thomas Askew. You had photographers in South Carolina and Washington, D.C. You had the Scurlocks. I mean, it's just an incredible opportunity for business as well. And so they become competitors for in this world. And so that's another whole aspect that resides outside of the images themselves.
That's a really good point.
Professor, in your work in this, and you talk about in the next book that you're working on up until 1950,
right.
But do we see the respect for the domestic, does that grow at all as we get into the 1950s?
Well, I'm so glad you're talking about the way photography changed. Mm-hmm. So photography as a business really changed. And one of the things that happens is, you know, it moves out of the studio into the home, so that more people are taking portraits in the home, more people are taking their own portraits. And if you look at that time period, there's tremendous change in the way that people represent their families, right, from one generation to the next. So there's a real change in the positioning of black servants, right? At first you see them, you can see a white family and then there's a black servant all the way on the side, an African-American woman, usually almost in the shadows of this portrait. Then you have these particular portraits where it's an African-American woman holding a white child. And then later you'll see just white families, you'll begin to see African-American families. I'm so glad that President Campbell is making this point. One of the things that helped in this conversation of putting this exhibit together that really changed the way that I thought about writing this book is that people kept saying to me, I don't know what I'm looking at. Mm-hmm. I have never seen portraits from this area, from this era, right? So I don't really know what I'm seeing. You have to tell me what I'm seeing. And I said, well, this is a black woman who's holding a white child, and it's probably 1880, maybe 1900. And someone said to me, can you show me a white woman with a white child from the same time period? And I did, and they said, oh, that's very different. Mm-hmm. She's holding that baby up against her, right? She's looking at the baby. Wow. Mm-hmm. The few pictures that we have of African-American women with their children from the same time period, very different. So the warmth and affection that we want to project onto a Mammy portrait, for example, when you see people with their own children, that's when you see it. Right. But the comparison is really helpful, and I don't think I knew that until people insisted on it.
So the other thing that was very striking here is this fascination with the black figure.
Right.
And you have to remember, at the time that these photographs are being made, photography is young, and it takes a lot to take a photograph, right? Yeah. You have to set it up, you have to get the light right, and if it's silver nitrate, there's a glass plate, and so it's more than a notion. It's not like a little brownie camera, right? Exactly. Or your selfies on your iPhone. So, but what's also striking about this period is that in Europe, this is also the time when European masters like Manet, like Degas, like Matisse are looking at the black female body as well. And we know that there's this exhibition posing modernity that opened in New York City at Columbia University that's now at the Musée d'Orsay that has now sort of pulled the covers off of the fascination of these artists with the Black female body. And it made me wonder whether or not in some of these photographs, whether there was some of that fascination as well.
That's exactly right, like a fetish.
A fetish, yes.
You can't tell people what to feel or how to think. I always say that, it's not my job to tell you how to think or what to think. I just want you to think about something. But if someone says, well, what am I supposed to take away from this? What would your response be?
Do you want to answer that?
You want to go first?
All
And then I'll go after you.
Okay. What I would say, there are so many things I want people to take away from this. One of the things I really want people to think about is the stories that we have about Black women taking care of white children, generation after generation, right? That we've heard them over and over again. It's in Gone with the Wind. It's in Member of the Wedding. It's in The Help. Before The Help, it's in To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the same narrative over and over again. As a historian, when you hear the same thing over and over again, that doesn't make it true. That makes it sound like propaganda to me, right? That doesn't make it true. Just because people say the same thing over and over again. And what they will say over and over again, the narrative, the driving narrative is, they loved us more than they loved their own children. Now that is an insult. That's an insult, right? When you talk to Black women, or when you read interviews of Black women who did domestic work, they talk about this experience as work, as employment. They say, I worked for this family for 15 years. They paid me well, they didn't pay me well. I went to work one day and I was fired. That was the end of it. I didn't get to say goodbye to anybody. My job was over, right? I was accused of stealing. I didn't steal. Then I couldn't get a job in the neighborhood again, right? But they are talking about their own lives in terms of the particular obsession that people have with representing this relationship over and over again. When you talk to these women or when you read what they have to say, they're not staying up at night writing poetry about these children, about how kind and important and smart they are. They are saying, I got home, I still had to cook and clean for my own children. So one of the things that has happened with this exhibit is, in the conversations that I have with people, someone came to my office recently to tell me how powerful this was. She said, this is the way people often say this, I had a woman like this in my family. There was a woman like this in my family. My mother had a woman like this. Possession, no name. I have to be the one to say, what is her name, right? Woman like this in my family. She took care of my mother from sunup to sundown. She was there in the morning, she made breakfast. She was there at evening, putting my mother to bed. I said, did this woman have any children? She said, oh yes, she had 5 children. The look that came across her face after a moment of, oh, she had 5 children of her own, who she took care of at the end of the day. When you add up how many hours she would have been allowed to stay with her own family, that's what I want people to take away from. That's what I want. Real women with lives, with aging parents, with children they don't get to spend enough time with, trying to make enough money. Someone told me, well, I know the woman who worked for my family really liked us because she came on her day off. She came on Sundays. I said, did she leave with a plate or food? Oh, yes, she got all the food. Maybe that's why she came on Sunday, was to get some extra food to take home to her family. So the insistence that that's love, that's affection, that that's unconditional, I really want people to ask more questions about that. What do you know about these women? If you can't remember their names, you don't know anything about their families. Someone who has 5 children, that means she was pregnant for several times while she was taking care of your mother, right? The real women with real lives. And I don't want anybody to leave this exhibit in some sense of guilt and go home and fire anybody. I'm in favor of employment for Black women. Let me be clear about this. I don't want your guilt to lead you to let anybody go. Pay them well and respect them. Really. Pay them and respect them. That's what so I want people to walk away and ask questions, right? If this was a relationship that I've heard about in my family, what do I know? Can I begin to ask some questions about what I've heard?
Yeah.
Right? That's what I want people to do. Walk away and ask some more questions. I think, and look at this relationship differently. That we need to stop looking at this relationship the same way. You know, we're in a moment where we're looking at the monuments and the flag, right? We're revisiting that. This is the stereotype that comes out at the same time period. The lost cause mythology, it's the same exact time period, right? What could change if we looked at this relationship in a different way? If we started to say, how do we dismantle our preconceived notions about the Mammy stereotype? Let's take this apart and take it down the way we're talking about taking down monuments and flags.
Look through the lens through somebody else's.
That's exactly right. Exactly.
So what's also, there's several things that are very, again, very, very striking about these, the images that you've chosen for the exhibit. Overwhelmingly, the women are quite beautiful.
Yes,
And,
right.
and they compel you to look at them. And they themselves assert their identity and assert an interior life, and the fact that there is an interior life as you're watching them. In point of fact, however, at the same time that these images were being photographed, the country was manufacturing images of mammies that were demeaning,
That's right.
that were utterly derogatory, that were caricatures, and they were doing it in a way that was utterly vicious. So they were deliberately meant to be exactly the opposite of what those women
The real
are
lives,
portrayed.
right.
That's right. And it shows up, it begins to show up in periodicals that were gaining wide circulation in the United States, in advertisements. It shows up in film, which was very young at that, 1915, Birth of a Nation
Right,
is
exactly.
almost unbearable
Yes, to watch.
And Gone with the Wind, you have an image from
Yes.
Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind was the first film with Technicolor.
Right.
And what was it about? It was, again, that those
same
same narratives. And you can watch those narratives just continue right through. So that it's very striking that these images set themselves apart
Right.
in that
Right,
way.
exactly.
But the other thing, however, is that you mentioned To Kill a Mockingbird. And so the interesting thing about the version of To Kill a Mockingbird that's on Broadway now, and Latanya Richardson Jackson, who's a Spelman alumna, plays the role of Calpurnia.
Calpurnia, right.
Now in the book, Calpurnia has, she is there to serve Atticus Finch and his family.
Right.
That is her life. That's the life that we're meant to read to some extent
Right.
in these photographs. What sets the Broadway play apart is Calpurnia tells him what's on her mind. And so this notion then, sort of rolling this back of what is the interior life, the drama that these women bear, as well as their private lives, the fact that they're mothers and wives and have families and their aunties and what have you. But what is it when they're there doing their work? What is the drama that's going on in their heads
Exactly.
about everything that's going on? So this is a very rich time for you to be sort of unearthing these images, because these images are now setting themselves up so dynamically in play with so many other things.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Professor, when we started this conversation and I asked you about, even now you've seen some of these so many times and it still stirs something into you, but now that the exhibit's out, people are ingesting it,
Right.
even still,
yeah,
it still gets to you, but
Yeah.
I think personally it's a wonderful exhibit.
Thank you
There is
so
beauty in
much.
that,
There is
beauty in the
beauty,
struggle,
yes, yeah.
beauty in the pain, and we look forward to more of this.
Thank you so much. This is so important to me. I really say, that this is a labor of love and a labor of sorrow. But I also feel very strongly that this is a rescue mission for me. Someone has to rescue these stories. Someone has to rescue these women from obscurity. And I am dedicated to doing that. People are not going to forget that. They're not going to be forgotten. I'm going to insist on it. I really do. When I look at them, it's like I'm having a conversation. 'Cause I'm going to make people see you. We're going to look at you. Somebody's going to recognize you. Somebody's going to have a name. Somebody's going to have a location at some point, and I'll begin to piece this story together. And that is what is so important to me. When it gets hard, when it gets tiring, when it gets painful, when it gets depressing, the sense that I am able to bring these women forward in a very powerful way, bring these little girls, right, into your, no one who sees a little black girl taking care of 3 little white children, you're never going to forget that image. And that it is the complete opposite of the Mammy from Gone with the Wind, the complete opposite, right?
Professor Saunders, President Campbell.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming out this evening and helping us celebrate this new exhibition and the work of Dr. Kimberly Wallace-Sanders. Can we have another round of applause for our panel?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We would also like to thank our guests, Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell and Rose Scott, for visiting our campus and really gracing us with their brilliance. A round of applause for them as well. Thank you. And so finally, we have a few gifts to give our guests that are parting gifts, of course.
One of the photographs?
Say it again?
One of the photographs?
I'll see what I can do. But we also have a parting gift for you. And that parting gift is for you to fill out the survey that is either under your seat or in your chair and leave it with us so we can reach out to you and contact you about future programs. These programs, of course, we love bringing to the public, but we have to reach out to you. So by you filling out this survey and giving it to one of our staff, we'll enter you into our database of names and be able to reach out to you when we have future programs. So again, thank you so much for coming out. If you did not have a chance to spend time with the exhibition, I believe it's still open. The library is still open. So you might want to hurry over there and walk through it on your way to Fishburne. But also be sure to see the Randall Burkett exhibit as well on his career of collecting here at Emory. Again, thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you.